11 or so. We've already looked at the first part of the slideshow, now we're on this part. And, yeah. So what difference did this revolution make? So, there are several things that we're going to be talking about individually. Here is the long list. Notice the little r, republicanism. So this is not like the Republican Party. This is becoming a republic, particularly a democratic republic, and we have become more democratic end of that as time progressed. So let's jump into that. Republicanism. So the idea behind republicanism is first this $10 word, popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty will be a vocab card later on, but basically it just means popular opinion of the people. The people rule. Sovereign means to rule, so the people rule. And we rule by voting. We vote in the people that we want, therefore we are voting in the ideas and the programs we want through those people. So popular sovereignty. Also the idea of limited government, specifically eventually with our Constitution. We don't get the Constitution straight away after the American Revolution. We're working with something else first, and we'll get to that later. Representative government. We vote for people to run the government for us, and hopefully they are responsive to us and representative of us. But sometimes, even though, we vote for representatives to the U.S. Congress and senators to the U.S. Senate, we have a lot of folks that have been in there for a long, long time, right? And it seems like the longer they're in there, the less responsive they are. Some states do term limit their people. Kentucky does not. The other states term limit senators or term limit representatives. We do term limit the president. In Kentucky, we term limit our governor.
How many terms is that? I didn't know.
2. So Andy Beshear is running for re-election this fall, and that would be it for him if he wins. And I would suspect if he wins, he'll be running for president in 2028. Because if he can win, if he, being a Democrat, can win in a very red state, right? That might be something, yeah? So, I don't know, we'll just have to wait and see. It's so exciting. Individual rights. Individual rights and freedoms. Think about, Bill of Rights and a lot of the things that we list there. And then this idea of a patriotic, virtuous, and educated citizenry. So patriotic, supporting the nation, supporting our representatives. Virtuous is not necessarily what we think of virtuous nowadays. Whenever we think of virtue back in the late 1700s, we're thinking about really political virtue, not necessarily when we think of virtue today, we're thinking about honesty, right, and being kind to others, and if you see a poor turtle in the middle of the road, you might stop and pull over and, shoo him back into the grass. That would be very virtuous of you to do. But virtue back in the late 1700s was more of a political idea of fairness, really, and a lot of these other ideas of rights and representation. And then we need to educate people with how this works and why this is good so we can continue it. All right, so the next big idea, the next big legacy of the American Revolution, besides republicanism, is egalitarianism, which is a $500 word for kind of equality. Not absolute equality, but this idea that in an egalitarian society, you have the ability to rise up in social status, in economic status, in political status, based on your virtue and, you know, the gifts, you know, the smartness in your head and the way you act and that sort of thing. So egalitarianism, and of course, whenever we look back to England that we got rid of, you had a monarchy system. You also had the lords that owned all the land and had special privileges versus the peons who did not. But in the United States of America, we're more of an egalitarian society. In fact, in the U.S. Constitution, we wrote it in. There is no nobility in the United States. Nobody is a lord anything. There are no barons. There is no aristocratic society versus everybody else. Okay? So no nobility, no lordships or anything like that. Now, obviously, the hitch in this egalitarian society that is being established is this problem, right? The American Revolution, even though in the Declaration of Independence, which the revolution is justified, in the Declaration of Independence it says all men are created equal, but yet there are still enslavers in the United States. But it looked like, when the revolution is closing, that slavery might be on the way out the door. Maybe. Up north, the northern states are doing gradual emancipation. Those states are basically paying enslavers to free the enslaved people. However, it's still not equality. Black people in the north, black men, no women can vote, period. But black men are not able to vote. And in New Jersey, black people were kicked out. They could not own property in New Jersey. You could live in New Jersey, but you could not own property in New Jersey. So you could, rent a home or rent whatever, but black people could not own land. So, this egalitarian society, we're still having issues with that. Of course, in the South, really the turning point with slavery comes in the 1790s. So there is a little window of the American Revolution which ends in 1783. And then it's about 1790, 1795. It looks like maybe slavery could be on the way out, but the invention of the cotton gin makes slavery very entrenched, and you start seeing the number of enslaved people increase quite significantly. The slave trade will increase until it's eventually outlawed, meaning the importation of slaves, of Africans into the U.S. That's eventually going to be outlawed in the early 1800s, but slavery is still around. lot of that has to do with the cotton gin. All right, we remember this guy, Thomas Jefferson, principal author of the Declaration of Independence. He is going to be one of the founding fathers that really makes a hard push for religious freedom. He will write the Virginia law for religious freedom, the Virginia statute for religious freedom. And he wanted to make sure that was included in the new Constitution whenever we start the Constitutional Convention a few years after this. So religious freedom. Now, Jefferson himself he believed in a God, but he was really more of a deist, meaning that he believed in a supreme being, because what else can explain this perfect world that we live in? He believed in a loving supreme being, but maybe not so much the Christian God. Jefferson was heavily criticized for being anti-Christian. He did write his own Bible by taking the King James Version of the Bible and literally cutting out the stuff that he liked and pasting it in a different book and calling it the Jefferson Bible. Yeah. So he was, yeah, kind of a weirdo. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to explain his religious ideas because he does talk about Christian faith quite a bit, but yet he really doesn't buy into a lot of the things that you should, like the resurrection, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. Well, the crucifixion he buys into, but not so much the resurrection. Okay, moving on. But religious freedom was so important to Jefferson that whenever he composed his own epitaph on his tombstone, he left this in his will, what he wanted to be included on his tombstone. And he only listed 3 things. And those were the 3 things he was most proud of. And of course, the Declaration of Independence is number 1, but the statute for Virginia for religious freedom is number 2. And then he founded the University of Virginia. So nowhere about being president, nothing about being an ambassador to foreign countries, nothing about the Louisiana Purchase where he doubled the size of the United States. It was these 3 things, with number 2 being this law for religious freedom. Women are going to see this much improvement in their lives as a result of the American Revolution. Not much. Women are still considered to be subservient to men, and we're going to read some articles later between Abigail Adams and her husband John Adams, where basically John Adams, and most men thought this way, he put women on the same plane as children and the savage Indians. They could not be trusted with their weak little minds to understand this new country and the republic, so y'all should not be able to vote. Okay? So, yeah, but there is a bright side to all of this. We're going to skip over her and we'll talk about that. And that is, women were still seen as being the most important person within the home. And this idea of strong families will equal a strong republic. And to keep together the family, that was seen as the central role of the wife, the mother, the woman. Now, a lot of times, to keep the family strong, women had to, overlook a lot of things that their husband was doing. And just kind of, don't ask, don't tell, and just, look the other way because got to keep the family strong. But women were given respect as leaders of the home. And because there is this idea of we need an educated public, it fell upon women most of the time to make sure that their children were educated. Now, Massachusetts will have public schools, but it's really the only state that's going to have public schools late in the 1700s. You don't start seeing public schools in other places in the north until the mid-1800s, and you don't see it in the south until way after the American Civil War. So the idea that women in the home they have to educate the children becomes a big idea because we're not doing public schools yet.
Which state did you say was that?
Massachusetts was the first. Because remember the Puritans and reading the Bible and training the ministers. So women still can't vote because their minds are too weak and feeble. Women are not going to get the right to vote until 1920. So I believe this might be a vocab word coming up. Republican motherhood. And Republican motherhood is kind of based on this idea of women are head of the home, women must raise the children, we have to educate the children, and we have to educate the children so we can keep this country on the right track. Strong families equals a strong republic, and educated citizens will equal a strong republic. All right, moving on down that first list, agrarianism, as in agriculture and farming. So agrarianism was one of the principles, I shouldn't say that. Agrarianism is the #1 industry in the colonies and now in the United States, right after the American Revolution. More people are farmers than anything else, and more wealth is produced by farming than anything else that is happening in the United States. Jefferson, big fan of farmers because he considers himself a farmer. But who did the farming? Exactly. He had enslaved people doing all the work on his quote-unquote farm. But he did think that farmers should have a special position in the hearts of all America and within society. Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, but not the people that do the labor for him, right? Only the white men that own the property. That would be a more accurate quote, right? Those who are white and are men and own the property on the earth are the chosen people of God, because he did not, obviously as an enslaver, he did not think that enslaved people were the chosen people of God. George Washington, also a quote-unquote farmer, right? He had a plantation as well, enslaved people as well. But George Washington is, of course, an American icon, the original American hero, and a good representation of what we see as a Republican soldier. He is the guy who came off the farm, fought in battle, won the war, and didn't announce himself as king. He went back to the farm and only came back to serve as president whenever others said, hey, this is not going well right now, we need your leadership again, please come out to the farm and be the president. So George Washington, being this Republican soldier, the people have chosen him, the people are asking him to lead, and he will do that service. Just a couple of other things about George Washington. He did have a plantation, a very large plantation, a very wealthy plantations. He had lots of different crops. He also had a brewery, and a lot of people had breweries back then. That wasn't anything, unusual. If you grew you don't grow whiskey. If you grow corn, then you usually had a distillery or a brewery that turned it into either beer or whiskey. And that's what he did as well. Something, we don't think of George Washington as an inventor, but he really was. This 16-sided barn was one of his really ingenious inventions. You have this upper level here, and then you have a lower level here. And I'll show you what it looks like inside. You see the upper level and the lower level. In the upper level, whenever the wheat is cut out of the fields, and the wheat looks like, tall grass, right? Is yellow, looks a little bit like what we would see as hay now. But you set the wheat on the floor in this upper level. Then you bring the horses in, and the horses just walk in a circle. It's a 16-sided barn. It looks like a circular barn, but it actually has 16 straight sides to it, but it looks like a big old circle. The horses just walk around the circle, and as they are walking, there are like small opening in the slats from the upper level, and the horses with their hooves walk in on that wheat, those wheat stalks. They are beating the grain out of the stalk and is collecting on the bottom. And it was the most efficient way to take the wheat grain out of that stalk. And everybody started copying that after Washington did it. So you can see down here, there's a few of the stalks that got pushed through as well, but those are mostly the grains on the bottom. And that's kind of how it looks, the top level and the bottom level. So, George Washington, he's really an impressive guy. I mean, I'm a big fan. He was very impressive looking as well. He was super tall for the age. He was over 6 feet tall when the average American was just 5'8". So, he was and he was his too. He would have been like an NFL linebacker nowadays. He was a stout guy, and would cuss you like that, and like make you cry on the spot. He had a very low tolerance for folks that not just disagreed with him, but that he saw as kind of stupid and lazy. And I hate to use those sorts of words, but he thought a lot of people were stupid and lazy, and he had a potty mouth, and he knew how to use it, and he would cut you down. Which is another reason folks were, they kind of, I don't want to say you look up to somebody who's ugly to people like that, but they respected this authority he asserted over people, I guess is the best way of saying it. And again, this is the most famous statue that we have of Washington. It's actually in the U.S. Capitol. And it just shows him as this is supposed to represent wrapped stalks of wheat, but he does have his sword. He's dressed in you know, what we would think of as good clothes back then, but it's nothing like this, right? He's not portrayed as a Greek god. He is not sitting on a throne. It is just representing this Republican simplicity. So, yeah, so this kind of sums up what the artist was trying to do and really why so many people just love Washington. So he's a farmer, soldier, and absolute legend. All right, so switching gears a little bit, the legacies of the Revolution, and of course one of the legacies of the Revolution was a failed government. Articles of Confederation. This is the first government of the United States of America, and it was written, it was enacted during the war, 1777. We declare independence, 1776. This goes into effect a few months later. So, the Articles of Confederation will fail because they are too weak to govern this large territory. And the reason they are so weak is because we wrote the Articles of Confederation in reaction to what we didn't like about the British. It wasn't, we were trying to create a better form of government. We were just trying to get rid of what we didn't like with the British. So it's like that essay you might have written at the very last minute. And you were just kind of rushing it in and not putting too much thought into it, right? So we didn't like taxation without representation, so we gave the government no power to tax. The U.S. government, the federal government, could not tax the American people, and they couldn't even tax the states. So how are you going to pay for an army? How are you going to pay for a nationwide postal service? How are you going to pay for an army? I mean, a government needs money, but we did not give the government power to tax because we were so worried about the taxes that Britain had put on us. We did not like all power being in the hands of one centralized government, and of course the monarchy and parliament is the English version. So we gave states all the power in the Articles of Confederation. States could pick and choose which laws the U.S. government passed. They could pick and choose whether they wanted to follow that law or not, or abide by that treaty that the U.S. government signed with England or not. So the states could do whatever they wanted to. There was a king that we thought was tyrannical, obnoxious, and crazy. So, we don't have an executive in the federal government, and again, the states have their own laws, and states do not have to respect other state laws. Power in the hands of king. We do not have any sort of king, president, no executive, and no court system for the whole U.S. government. And then lastly, the king could make changes at the drop of a hat, but in order to change the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states had to agree. All 13 state legislatures would have to agree. And you know that ain't ever gonna happen. So, the Articles of Confederation were bound to fail because they were not well, I mean, those guys were smart and they thought it through, but they were not well thought out into how to effectively run a large area like the United States. They were written in reaction to what we didn't like with England. The thing that we point to say, this new system of government in the United States, the Articles of Confederation, it ain't gonna work. The thing we point to is the Shays Rebellion. And we're gonna watch a little video about Shays Rebellion, then we'll go through the little note parts of the Shays Rebellion. Ma'am? Thank you. Sid and Blair. And looks like it doesn't matter who gets what. Cause I don't think they have names. Oh. Alright, so we'll take a look at this and then we will keep on rocking.
It's for GSP.
The Revolutionary War left American states in debt. To raise money, legislators raised taxes. This anchored poor farmers and war veterans to the point where they formed a rebellion, almost caused a civil war in Massachusetts. Daniel Shays, the former captain in the Continental Army, led the protest, which became known as Shays' Rebellion. In the summer of 1786, several thousand of Shays' followers prevented tax collection and used force to keep debtors out of prison. They headed to Springfield to seize weapons, intending to force the Boston legislature to change the law. Massachusetts residents were terrified. The legislature realized it was powerless. The Continental Army had been disbanded after the Revolutionary War, and the federal government had no money for new troops. Finally, wealthy merchants in Boston agreed to raise an army of over 4,000 militia to fight Shays' men.
These men were talking about forming a new country out there. There's no telling what might have happened. If Shays' Rebellion had flourished, if these guys had been able to grab all the guns and arsenal and arms, a big army, it would have been a very bad thing for the country. The people in Boston sort of put together a 4,000-man army and marched across western Massachusetts and basically blew Daniel Shays and his friends away. They all ran for their lives when they saw these guys coming at them.
Shays and his troops were eventually pardoned, and Massachusetts began to offer tax and debt relief. Locally, this clash was anticlimactic, but Shays' Rebellion had momentous consequences for the nation. It highlighted the weakness in the Articles of Confederation, which didn't give Congress the right to establish or fund an army.
The impact of Shays' Rebellion was convincing people that we had to have a really strong federal government. Washington and Alexander Hamilton and a lot of other people said that this proves that we've got to have a new constitution.
Alright, so, here, and I want to, I don't like that look. Okay, so, oopsie, let's go back here. Alright, so Shays' Rebellion. What starts the rebellion is farmers in western Massachusetts. They are losing their farms. The Massachusetts legislature is charging high property taxes, and the farmers out west, they are not making enough on their crops to pay the property taxes on their farms. And if you don't pay, what do you think might happen?
You go to jail.
You could go to jail, you could lose your farm. If you don't pay your taxes, then usually what happens first is that the government will come seize your property for non-payment. If you don't pay your car payment, what might happen to your car?
Taken away.
Yes, it gets repossessed. The bank hires somebody and they go take it away out of your driveway in the middle of the night. So the farmers were worried about losing their farms. You could also go to jail as well if you owed up to, if there was a certain dollar amount. If your debt exceeded that certain dollar amount, you could be imprisoned. And now that you are in jail, nobody is working the farm, so you're really not making any money, and then you get deeper into debt. So the farmers out west, they were protesting these high taxes. that sound familiar? I mean, what was one of the big gripes with the Americans versus the British? Yeah? So the Western Massachusetts farmers, they felt like they were just continuing the American Revolution. They are saying that, well, now Massachusetts has become this tyrannical government over us, and we have the right to fight it. So Daniel Shay, he is one of these affected farmers. He is going to kind of rile up a lot of the farmers around him in his community, and they are going from town to town and raiding these arsenals. We called them magazines back then, but where you would stockpile weapons for these colonial militias back in colonial times. And they were getting these weapons, arming themselves, and they were attacking courthouses, they were attacking jails, they were attacking what they saw as the government system that was being unfair to them. Federal troops cannot help because there are no federal troops. There is no U.S. Army. You can't have an army unless you have soldiers. You can't have soldiers unless you pay for soldiers. And our U.S. government had no money. So there was no army to come help put down this rebellion. So like the video said, the big deal around this, because Shays' Rebellion is rather short-lived. It lasts for about 4 months. A couple of hundred people were killed. Courthouses were burned down. It was violent, but it was short-lived. But the thing that is the most significant thing is that our U.S. government is too weak. Daniel Shay and what started out as a gang of 15 other farmers, they were pretty close to taking over all of the state of Massachusetts. If the rich folks in Boston didn't hire their own soldiers, like they put together, they called it a militia, but it was mercenaries. Sam Adams, y'all remember Sam Adams from Sons of Liberty fame? Sam Adams was the #1 bankroller of this Massachusetts militia that went down and put down Shays' Rebellion. Because Sam Adams did not want these guys taking over a government that was useful to him. You don't need to list this, but this is a famous quote by Thomas Jefferson. This is in a letter to James Madison. And he says, "A little rebellion now and then is a good thing. It is a medicine necessary for the sound health of government." He kind of was rooting for the farmers because he always thought that farmers were the backbone of the American system. And he thought this was kind of cute. He wasn't there. He was in France. So it wasn't cute to the people in Massachusetts that what was happening. Now, the Articles of Confederation, they weren't all bad. They do have some accomplishments. I think we're going to list 3 here. First, they do have a treaty with Great Britain, the Treaty of Paris 1783, that ends the American Revolution, which some of y'all got confused with on the vocab deck. In the vocab deck, I asked for the Treaty of Paris 1763, which ends the French and Indian War. So, Treaty of Paris 1783, and ending the American Revolution, getting recognition as our own country, that's a big deal. That's a win. Also, we have 2 things with the Northwest Territory. The Land Ordinance of 1785, and this put a huge chunk of land which we just called the Northwest Territory, it organized it into future states. So if we look at our map here, we know the 13 original colonies, the 13 original states, are on the coast. They did not extend past the Appalachian Mountains. But after the American Revolution, the United States extends from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Mississippi River. So the Northwest Territory is pretty much everything north of the Ohio River. So Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, even parts of Kentucky, we consider them the Northwest Territory. And it's going to be it's going to be established, okay, this is what you have to do to become an official state and join the original 13 states. And then one more thing particular to the Northwest Territory is the Northwest Ordinance. The big thing about the Northwest Ordinance is that it will outlaw slavery in those areas. So north of the Ohio River, so north of Kentucky. So Ohio will be a free state. Illinois, Indiana. Northwest Territory will, slavery will be outlawed. We'll see a map of the Northwest Territory next. So this is what we call the Northwest Territory. Northwest Ordinance applies here. All right, wrapping it up here. The Constitutional Convention, this happens in 1787. Because folks realized that the Articles of Confederation were not going to work, we are going to switch to a new system of government, and that is going to be the Constitution we have now. This guy has been called up to lead the convention, and this guy is George Washington. You've got a lot of the usual founding fathers here. Really everyone except Thomas Jefferson. He's in France. He's an ambassador to France. And John Adams, and for most of this, he is ambassador to England. Sometimes he's in the Netherlands, but mostly in England. So, but you have Ben Franklin, you have James Madison, you have Alexander Hamilton, you have a lot of the other guys we associate as founding fathers, and Washington is the guy leading it. So, y'all have all been through at least civics or AP Gov, so we're not going to talk about the Constitution much here. But what we will talk about is the fight over ratification. And there's two sides. Everybody that is here in this Constitutional Convention, they have their own hand in, you know, the articles. You've got the Congress set up, you've got the president established, you've got a judicial branch established, and everybody's agreeing to that. But then we start dividing, the guys at the Constitutional Convention are being divided into a federalist versus an anti-federalist. Now, the big thing with the federalists, they want the Constitution as is. Anti-federalists, they want to add a Bill of Rights. The federalists, they think that we don't need a Bill of Rights because nowhere in the Constitution do we give the president or the Congress or the courts to limit your speech. They don't have the power to do that. Therefore, they can't. They don't have the power to impose a religion on you, so therefore they can't. The anti-federalists, they were like, well, you know what? Just because our intention is that they can't, that doesn't mean somebody may not try. So we need to write it down into the Constitution that we have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all that good stuff. So the Federalists go on the offensive and write what become known as the Federalist Papers. And they are encouraging people to adopt the Constitution as is. The anti-federalists start fighting back, and it's like, no, forget it. If you're not going to add a Bill of Rights, let's just reject the whole thing. States vote against adopting this Constitution. On the Federalist side, your big Federalists are Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and by the way, James Madison, if you have to point to one guy saying he's the guy who wrote the Constitution, it's James Madison. Okay, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration. James Madison wrote the Constitution. And J is John Jay, who we'll talk more about later. All right, very good. So the Federalist Papers are a series of essays that support ratification to the Constitution, or ratification of the Constitution. Did y'all have to read those in AP Go? Yeah, some of them anyway. There are some that are more famous than others, particularly the ones written by Hamilton and Madison. They were published throughout the different states in newspapers. They were published in book form. Most Americans were aware of this battle of should we accept this new Constitution or not. And most Americans had read these arguments. The anti-federalists, they had their own leaders, particularly Patrick Henry. He's the give me liberty or give me death guy from Virginia. He said that going into the American Revolution. So he was popular, famous. You also have, and he was a very, vibrant speaker, so a lot of people listened when he spoke. Otis Warren, who was another signer of the Declaration of Independence, a very popular guy back in the day. He's from Massachusetts. He's going to write this essay. And George Mason is also a leading anti-federalist. So the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, they eventually come to a compromise, and that's what the Constitution was all about to begin with, was compromise after compromise after compromise. And this becomes a compromise too. And the compromise, of course, is vote for the Constitution, and we will add a Bill of Rights to it. All right? Let's pass this Constitution, drop your objections, let's get this thing ratified, and the first thing we will do is add a Bill of Rights to it. And that is exactly what happens. This is just one of the Federalist essays and Mason's reply. You can see, based on the map, Federalists mostly were in your middle states, and then up here the larger cities. The anti-federalists were usually more countryside people, living in mostly rural areas in the interior. But eventually it was settled. We adopt the Constitution, we add a Bill of Rights. So Federalists went after proposing 20 amendments. How many do we have in the Bill of Rights?
27.
10. So it was, again, we compromised that.
Oh, wait, did you say the bill?
Yes, the Bill of Rights.
Oh, 10.
Yes, 10.
I
There's
thought you meant the
27
whole
total, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, just 10 in the Bill of Rights. So this is something that you would see in the newspapers. So every time one of the states voted yes to ratify the Constitution, they would add another one of those pillars. Because the first state to ratify the Constitution was Delaware. Then you have Pennsylvania, then New Jersey, Georgia, Connecticut, Massachusetts has they were voting, you had to have, it was a 2/3 majority? Yeah, 2/3 majority, so you didn't have to have all of them. And Massachusetts, whenever, they are erected here, the 9th pillar, and this is Virginia, this is the one that gives it the 2/3 majority and makes the Constitution the law of the land. And eventually, all of those initial 13 states will ratify the Constitution. Rhode Island, they were the last holdout, but eventually they voted yes. Alright, not gonna go over this, because I think civics or AP Gov covered it. But you have RAPS for Amendment 1, right to bear arms with 2, quartering troops. Again, this is very much a reaction to what the British were doing. Seizure, due process, attorney, all that stuff. Probably the most misunderstood of the Bill of Rights might be number 5 with due process, but also number 10, reserved rights to the states. So number 10, the power that a government needs that is not specifically given to the U.S. government, then the states should have the right to do that. So, there you go, and that is that. So, Constitution. Hopefully, I'll rely well on Coach Carrick that he taught you well with that, and it'll be great, right? All right, last thing is our letters. These are fun. You don't like this. Letters from Abigail and John. The Adamses. So we have about 4 letters in total. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 4 letters. From Abigail to John, from John back to Abigail, and then vice versa. And it tells us a lot about
Thank you. Thank you.
what John Adams is thinking, establishing the new American government. And then the role of women in the new American government.
Oh, thanks.
Oh,